Apple's MacBook Pro 16-inch may be big, but there's a bigger laptop in town. Okay, so there are plenty of bigger laptops around, but the LG Gram 17 is not only larger, but it's also much lighter and thinner. It offers a gorgeous, gigantic 17-inch screen that you can take with you, just in case you need a roomier canvas on the go. LG has proven it can fit a big screen in a small package, but the Gram 17 doesn't pack the performance punch you might expect from a system this size. What really stands out about the Gram 17 is its pairing of a giant display and almost impossibly slim profile. Thanks to things like Intel's Project Athena and Ultrabook categories, as well as NVIDIA's Max-Q designs, laptops are getting more svelte by the year. But the Gram 17 would be incredibly thin and light even for a 15-inch laptop. Surrounding the display are bezels that are barely there, and the chassis is largely unadorned, giving it a very sleek look. At 2.9 pounds, the Gram 17 is even thinner and lighter than the Dell XPS 15 or the 4.3-pound MacBook Pro 16. The whole reason the Gram 17 is so light, other than to demonstrate LG's ability to engineer such a thing, is to allow people to carry around such a huge screen with them without straining their shoulders and arms. If you need a large screen for making sales presentations, for example, and you don't want to lug an external monitor around, this could be handy. Otherwise, though, it's hard to think of a use case that would justify such a big screen in such a thin and light body. Even though the Gram 17 fits snugly into my largest tote, it was quite unwieldy to carry around. I actually opened it up on the train to get some work done, and I found myself poking the passengers beside me because the laptop spilled over the boundaries of my seat. It's definitely a lot easier to carry around than any other 17-inch laptop, and I'm more likely to bring it to a meeting than, say, an Alienware or an ROG of the same screen size. But I'd always pick a 15-inch system or smaller to take on the go whenever possible. Though the magnesium frame is incredibly light, it does feel a little cheap and fragile compared to the more tank-like build of other 17-inch laptops. Still, LG said the Gram 17 meets military spec standards for durability. And though I didn't have the guts to toss this thing around too much, it did remain in near perfect condition, even after I stashed it in my giant purse and jostled around sometimes violent strangers on the New York subway. I also tried to twist the Gram 17, and the machine did give a little bit, but that teeny bit of flex is something I'm willing to live with as a trade-off for such a light body. Because there's so much room on the Gram 17, LG was able to cram a generous array of ports. There's 3 USB 3A ports, a USB-C slot, an HDMI socket, an Ethernet port, as well as a microSD card reader and a headphone jack. Though this thing is so big, it almost feels like there's still room for a CD-ROM drive, if you remember those. The Gram 17 offers a reasonable resolution of 2560 by 1600, which translates to a spacious 16 by 10 aspect ratio. The nice thing about this is that it lets you open up a ton of apps and multitask like a legend. You can quarter up the display and have 4 apps running at the same time, or you can do what I did, which is open up multiple reference pages for specs and articles side by side while banging out a review. That real estate is incredibly useful for serious multitasking. I also like that the display was really bright and colorful. Images from a sample 4K video on YouTube looked straight up gorgeous. Plus, I could place the Gram 17 on the table in a hotel room and still clearly see characters from my favorite TV shows from the bed about 6 feet away. Because it has such a sharp profile compared to rival 17-inch systems, the Gram 17 also has far less depth to offer in its keyboard. That isn't to say that the buttons here are quite as shallow as the MacBook Airs, but don't expect the cushy travel you get from most systems this size. There's still some depth here, and the snappy feedback makes typing more comfortable. Since there's plenty of room on the deck itself though, LG saw fit to squeeze in a numpad as well as a handy power button at the top right corner that also houses a fingerprint sensor for convenient logins. Yet, the company made some curious decisions in the layout. Specifically, the Enter and Backspace keys are smaller than usual. Because of that, these keys require a little more reaching than I'm used to, and instead of hitting Enter, I ended up inserting a lot of quote marks. I also found it hard to reach for the delete key, which set all the way to the top right of the backspace button. The trackpad, on the other hand, benefited from the extra space. This glass-covered surface is generously sized, and I never ran out of room while scrolling through pages or pinching to zoom, and the cursor was consistent and responsive. Oddly, with such a roomy chassis, you'd think that LG would find enough room to squeeze in a more powerful graphics card. Yet, because the Gram 17 is so thin, there isn't a lot of room for a sophisticated cooling system that needs to accompany those. Instead, it comes with an Intel UHD 620 GPU. Now, I'm not the most hardcore gamer or video editor. My most demanding task was running the occasional game of Overcooked, so this held up for most of my workloads. Those expecting more beef, though, will likely be disappointed. The laptop's CPU is an 8th generation quad-core Intel Core i7 processor, and it performed decently for the most part. It had no problem with my usual workload, which includes multiple browser tabs while sneaking in a few episodes of The Good Place on Netflix in the background. But the computer did stutter when I tried to jump between folders while unzipping 3 folders at the same time. Though that's more a product of the slow SSD than the CPU. It's not an apples to apples comparison, but consider a recent notebook of a similar size, like the MacBook Pro 16. It packs a 6 or 8 core i7 or i9 chipset with AMD's Radeon Pro graphics options, so you'll have plenty more power for demanding tasks. Other 17-inch laptops tend to be gaming notebooks and are often complete tanks, like the Alienware Area 51M, and pack much more muscle into heftier frames. At $1,700, the Gram 17 also costs about $1,000 less than these two laptops. It's a completely different kind of machine though. You're better off thinking of it as a thin and light mainstream laptop with a big screen, rather than a large notebook packing powerful guts in a thin and light frame. Since most 17-inch laptops tend to just sit on your desktop, battery life usually isn't a priority for these machines. Yet, the Gram 17 managed to clock almost 13 hours on our battery test. That's about an hour longer than the MacBook Pro 16, but a half hour shorter than the XPS 15. The Alienware Area 51M, meanwhile, lasted a hilarious 1.5 hours. I'm truly impressed by what LG was able to do with the Gram series, even as I struggle to understand why someone would want to lug around such a large screen on the go. The best uses for big displays are demanding tasks like video or graphics editing, so you can see more of your timeline, and those processes require more muscle than the Gram 17 offers. What the Gram 17 ultimately is a way to show what laptop makers could do if all they cared about was shaving off inches and pounds. For more reviews of smaller laptops, bigger phones, or just anything under the sun when it comes to consumer technology, make sure you subscribe to Engadget.